because this is the year democracy can die. More than 60 elections and about half the world's population will be voting at a time when we have less protection, when these big tech companies have actually taken away trust and safety teams because they can.
Mamilos Café.
Olá, entrem e fiquem à vontade. Esse é o Mamilos Café, o nosso espaço para conversar com mentes instigantes de peito aberto. Passa um café, puxa uma cadeira e vamos juntos. Ela nasceu em Manilha, nas Filipinas, em 1963. Publicou 3 livros que foram traduzidos em diversas línguas. É jornalista e presidente da Rappler, o principal site de notícias do seu país. Por anos, foi correspondente internacional da CNN na Ásia. Em 2018, foi eleita Personalidade do Ano pela revista Time. Em 2021, ganhou o Prêmio Mundial de Liberdade de Imprensa da Unesco, o Nobel da Paz. Ela é uma das 25 principais figuras da Comissão de Informação e Democracia, lançada pelo Repórteres Sem Fronteiras, e é considerada a jornalista mais conhecida das Filipinas. Hoje, o nosso café tem a honra de receber a mulher que é um dos maiores exemplos de determinação na luta a favor da democracia e liberdade de informação, não só do seu país, mas no mundo. É uma honra te receber aqui, Maria. Seja muito bem-vinda.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Então vamos começar. Conta pra gente por que você escolheu ser jornalista.
I fell into it. I was actually pre-med in college. I was a good Asian. My parents wanted me to be a doctor, and so in my first 2 years, I did everything I needed to do to be pre-med. And the last 2 years, I did what I wanted, which was English, theater, looking at psychology, and then I never went to medical school. When I graduated, I wanted to understand what being Filipino was like, because when martial law was declared in the 70s, my family moved to America. And then when I was graduating, I applied for a Fulbright fellowship to go back to the Philippines to understand what being Filipino meant. That's how I fell into journalism, strangely enough.
Pois é, você teve a oportunidade de ficar em Princeton e fazer carreira internacional. Por que você escolheu voltar para o seu país?
I think it was about trying to figure out who I was. You know, I never felt completely American. I'm very quiet by American standards. I'm an introvert, right? Which is part of what journalism changed, you know. And then I didn't know what being Filipino meant, but I felt that maybe parts of me were Filipino. So I went back to the Philippines. I didn't want to be a tourist. I wanted to be there for a year. I came back and I never really left. I set up the Manila bureau for CNN in 1987 and then stayed in Asia in 1995. I set up the Jakarta bureau for CNN. So it was, I think first it was a search for who I was. And then the second was understanding that you were more than who these labels, which is something like today's generation has to grapple with, right? But falling into journalism, I love being able to ask questions. It is the best, right? And that you have to answer them and to be able to ask heads of state, anyone smack in the middle of whatever that is. And, you know, whether you're rich or poor, whether your house has been overrun by, we have an average of 20 typhoons every year in the Philippines. It was incredible to be able to go where something was happening. As everyone is trying to run out, you're going in. That's incredible.
Muito bem, você estava falando da lei marcial. Você pode explicar para a nossa audiência um breve panorama desse momento em que você criou a Rappler, assim, da onde que as Filipinas tinham saído, acabado de sair, como foi essa eleição do Duterte e o que ela significou para você?
Yeah, so let me talk about the Philippines. The joke in the Philippines is that we spent 300 years in a convent and 50 years in Hollywood. These were our colonizers, right? 300 years under Spanish rule, 50 years under America. And in that time period, our culture who we were. Catholicism, we're Asia's largest Roman Catholic nation. I became a journalist at a time when CNN, I started when it was chicken noodle news, right? And then it became this huge, right? I loved the fact that we were able to go live from different places. And then I began to realize that after almost 20 years of doing breaking news, going through most of Asia and then watching, my career was really about how Southeast Asia went from kind of one-man authoritarian rule, how the pendulum swung to democracy, right? So I covered that, and then I began to realize that the internet was really taking things away, and that coincided. So when I left CNN, I decided to go back to the Philippines. I headed the largest news organization there for 6 years, and then the internet took over. That's how I set up Rappler, because if you're a large legacy news organization, the internet it's where you put your third string or your kids. It never made enough money to justify putting your best people on it. Oh, not even today. Today, though, we're being inundated by digital, right? Everyone has moved to digital. Okay, so what's happened in the context of the Philippines? The move to the internet meant that the design of the companies that controlled the internet began to permeate all parts of life, right? And one of those in the Philippines was Facebook. The Philippines is Facebook country, and that meant that, for 6 years in a row, Filipinos spent the most time online and on social media globally, and 100% of Filipinos on the internet are on Facebook. Facebook was our internet. So the design of Facebook determined what information you got, right? In that time period in 2016, with Facebook sending people to the Philippines to help the political campaigns, Rodrigo Duterte won as president. I would say he crumbled the fledgling institutions of democracy within 6 months. He became the most powerful leader that our country has ever had, even despite having a dictator like Marcos for almost 21 years, right? So it's the role that fear plays, the role like when people voluntarily give up their rights, it's instantaneous. And you have to be careful because things can change like this.
Muito bem. Já que você está falando de medo, a principal bandeira que o governo Duterte usou foi de guerra às drogas, certo? Que é uma bandeira muito familiar para a gente aqui no Brasil. No mundo inteiro, esse modelo de guerra às drogas já está dando sinais de esgotamento. E vários países buscam alternativa, mesmo sem uma fórmula milagrosa. Para países como a Filipina e o Brasil, países pobres, qual pode ser o ponto de virada para a gente desistir de abordagens autoritárias e apostar no controle desse dinheiro para virar o jogo?
It becomes harder and harder. I think one of the things we look to Brazil for is that you have a working justice system, right? That's critical in terms of the global South. But in our country, I've always said this, I've had 11 arrest warrants, and yet I've done nothing wrong. And there are many, many more instances of this where rule of law is co-opted by power, right? So what can we do? I think the first step, let me bring you to the present day where technology acts as the catalyst to really turn the world upside down, right? So in 2018, MIT came out with a study that said on social media, lies spread 6 times faster. Right?
Of course.
And our data in the Philippines said that if you lace it with fear, anger, and hate, it spreads even faster. Hand in hand with that, the attack on women in the Philippines in 2017, and this was just on women journalists, was 10 times more than against men, right? So you can already see, so what do we have to do that? Number one, stop the corruption of the information ecosystem. I became a journalist because information is power. And today, our information ecosystem is literally corrupted by, I call it surveillance for profit, right? Big tech companies that take your data, my data, and essentially clone us, and then they micro-target us, sending us the message that they're paid to do, and can be literal, and you can be pounded a million times with the same message in this new world, right? What kind of world has it created? It has made a world that has encouraged the worst of humanity. In the Nobel lecture, I compared it to an explosion of an atom bomb in our information ecosystem. And until today, we are still counting the dead. Right? So how do we fix it? We have to stop the impunity that these big tech companies have done. Right? And that requires governments coming in to actually protect the citizens. Right? It's almost like in the United States, there's a Better Business Bureau, right? If you have lead in your toy, there's a law that stops you from doing that. The least regulated industry in the world is tech. Exactly. And it touches every one of us. And it is changing every one of us. Just last May, the Surgeon General of the United States just pointed out the impact on kids, right? That young children, kids, teenagers, have greater incidence of sleeplessness, of ADHD, of young girls who have eating disorders, greater incidence of suicide. That's just our kids. What about us? Right? What about the women journalists who are pounded to silence, who have to deal with PTSD to keep doing our jobs, right? I think it's time for us to reclaim our rights. And this is something that Dmitry Muratov and I came up with a 10-point action plan to do that. 3 things in that 10-point plan. The first is stop surveillance for profit. Make it illegal to insidiously manipulate us. 2, stop coded bias. Right? These are written by men who, if you are marginalized in the physical world, if you're a woman, LGBTQ+, you are further marginalized online. And then finally, the last one is journalism as an antidote to tyranny, right? No offense to those influencers, but journalists are not influencers. We have a set of standards and ethics. We hold power to account, and we're willing to go to jail. We're willing to die in order to hold power to account.
Eu tenho várias perguntas aqui sobre jornalismo e sobre dados. Você falou que dados são plutônio, que a gente voltou para a guerra nuclear, né? Acho que a gente precisa falar bastante disso. Eu só queria dar um passo atrás para falar um pouquinho do cenário em que todas essas discussões aconteceram, porque essa figura do Duterte, do líder populista, carismático e autoritário, é bem clichê para a gente aqui na América Latina, muito familiar.
Yeah, yes, of course.
A gente conhece muito esse enredo do outsider que vai para o poder para acabar com as elites, com as instituições. Conhecemos, bem. Só que eu não sei se você conhece o Cas Moody, o professor que escreveu sobre a extrema-direita. No livro dele sobre populismo, Populismo, uma breve introdução, ele relaciona essa familiaridade que a gente tem com líderes populistas com desigualdade. Porque o que ele fala? Enquanto a elite controlar todas as esferas de poder, usando essas esferas para manter o status quo, para manter uma profunda desigualdade, o povo vai continuar apostando em líderes carismáticos que venham de camadas mais baixas como uma tentativa de virar esse jogo que está viciado. Então, eu acho muito bom, porque às vezes a gente como jornalista é condescendente e fala, eu tenho que ensinar o povo a não acreditar mais em populista, a não cair no canto da sereia. Quando, na verdade, é uma escolha válida, é uma estratégia válida. Entendeu? Se é tão desigual e só a elite chega no poder e ela sempre mantém as coisas como tá, eu vou ter que apostar em outra coisa. O que a gente pode fazer para cortar esse ciclo vicioso, senão a gente vai acabar na mão de populista sempre?
I think we have to understand this is a different moment in time. And yes, electing populists, I mean, populism has been there forever, right? I.e., let me equate populism with lies again, right? Because did any of these populist leaders actually deliver what they were promising? I look at my country and I will say no. And every time that has happened, they've taken power and they twisted it, and we've created kleptocracies, right? The problem today is that the new gatekeepers, these big tech companies, have allowed populists, I will call them digital authoritarians, to actually gain power. They've given them more power because they've hacked our biology. They've manipulated our emotions to the point that we are electing illiberal leaders democratically. And today, if you look at January this year, VDEM in Sweden said that 72% of the world is now under authoritarian rule. The reason why I'm in Sao Paulo today is because I am interested in how you not just went through the years of Bolsonaro, but you've moved kind of a little bit like the Philippines. We went from hell and we're in purgatory.
Yes.
But this is still a moment of creative destruction, right? Everything that we've created in the past is gone. And the match that lit all of that is technology. And what are we going to do today? Brazil survived January 8th. It's actually moved forward faster. And then I look at what you're doing today globally in terms of demanding information integrity, because we must have a world anchored on facts. We can't have our citizens burying their heads in the sand, saying the world is too complex, or I want more, more, more. We need to have a place where we can discuss this. And that used to be what democracy gave us. So putting together a digital public sphere becomes a critical task for us. And I hope Brazil finds that way and leads the global south in doing that. Okay, so how do we stop electing populists? Okay, let me put it this way. I think we need to make sure we have deliberative technology. Technology as the world turns into the virtual world, right? Everything is pushed into the internet. It's now been co-opted by large, big companies that have absolute impunity to manipulate us. That needs to stop. We need to demand better. And then the second thing is that we need to understand that this is the moment where we could lose democracy. What's the option? Have any of these dictators ever delivered? Our people have lost faith in systems of governments, and it is a perfect storm because the kinds of growth of the GDP rate didn't actually equate to more money and more food on my own table. It is a perfect storm of the world, but I think this is also a moment where we can create something better. Right? The UN moves at the pace of a glacier. But there is a global digital compact. And the reason why I focus on the internet is because look at the impact it's already had in such a short period of time. It can be a force for good, right?
Então, mas eu gosto de pensar, acho que a gente precisa muito pensar em tecnologia, mas tem uma parte humana, de tecnologia humana, que está difícil também. Então, por exemplo, você estava falando da importância de ter o jornalista como gatekeeper, de filtrar, porque tem informação demais, como é que a gente filtra e faz sentido da informação? Ok. Aí a gente tem, bem parecido com o que aconteceu na Filipinas no Brasil, que você tem um governo que todos os dias cria uma notícia, todos os dias tem um limite que é testado ou que é ultrapassado. E aí fica tanto a imprensa quanto a sociedade civil organizada nesse desafio de que eu tenho que mostrar que uma linha foi cruzada e de se eu toco o alarme todo santo dia, na hora que uma coisa realmente urgente, importante acontecer, ninguém mais presta atenção quando eu falo. E aí, eu quero saber, o que você aprendeu nessa experiência de resistência? Como é que se combate a tentativa de assassinar uma democracia por uma morte de 1000 corpos?
Wow. I think, let me give you the successes that we have had, right? Journalists are not alone. And what we found in the Philippines in May 2022, we did a whole of society approach to protect the facts. again, not taking sides in this, right? Even though this is a problem for journalists in general. Like, I actually always say now, my peers, so I turned 60 last year. Yes, I'm old, but my peers will say journalists are not activists. Well, when it's a battle for facts, which is where we are today, journalists are activists, right?
Okay.
And again, I know that I keep going back to the technology, but it is because this technology has, its tech, we'll call it personalization, right? Personalization means that, if in their old world, if you bought sneakers, then I'll keep feeding you sneakers, but it's gotten significantly better. So let us say the 20 of us in a room full of 20 people will each be given a personalized reality, okay? How are we going to talk to each other? Personalized reality led to, oh, wow, all of those different versions, which means we cannot solve any problem. A room with 20 people in different realities is called an insane asylum. Imagine the world where this is the world we're living in, right? Again, let me talk about my age, but I'm going to put two movies together. Remember The Matrix?
Yes.
Where we provided the energy for this entire world. Human beings were the batteries for that. Okay, so take the Matrix, where we're the batteries for the new world, and then combine it with The Truman Show, where we're each performing, but no one is watching, right? I guess the reason why that's important to me is because if we cannot create a shared reality, we cannot have governance. And it doesn't matter which kind of government you are, right? People are being manipulated. So all of the problems, the old world problems of the physical world are still there. But the newer problems of living in an insane asylum, this is our biggest problem today. We need to have the same reality. We need to agree that Amazon must be saved. We need to agree climate change is a problem, right? And until we do, we won't be able... This is an existential moment for the world.
Eu tô tentando entender que a pessoa que ganhou um prêmio e tá escrito por seus esforços para salvaguardar a liberdade de expressão, que é uma pré-condição para a democracia e uma paz duradoura, tá querendo me convencer que é para regular a internet, ou seja, você é contra a liberdade de expressão, Maria. Eu não consigo entender isso. Como é que pode, Maria? Tá aí a extrema-direita lutando pela nossa liberdade de expressão, Maria, e você querendo nos limitar? Você faz isso, Maria? Você não quer que as pessoas tenham liberdade de expressão, Maria?
So everyone has the right to say whatever they think, even if it's far-fetched. The moon is blue, right? But you don't have the right to make it the front page headline tomorrow. So it is, it's not a free speech issue. It's a distribution issue, right? When you say a lie 1,000,000 times, it becomes a fact. And when the far right says that, this is curtailing freedom of speech, it's because the entire world has been turned upside down. Again, another, if you go to Stranger Things, right? They go into the upside down. When lies spread faster, we're in the upside down and everything seems remotely familiar, but it's covered with goo. What the far right is saying, what Elon Musk is saying, right, that this is free speech. And I would say these are the libertarians of Silicon Valley that have not been held accountable for what they've done. What they're doing is actually gaslighting us, right?
Exactly. Eu queria, eu não sei se ficou claro para quem está nos assistindo, que você cobriu no início da sua carreira o processo de democratização das Filipinas, o processo de construir as instituições.
Yes.
Que se eu estou correta na minha leitura de que o presidente atual é o filho do ex-ditador, certo? Ferdinando Marcos. Eu diria que essa democracia que você tão empolgadamente assistiu não segurou uma geração, né? A gente não aprende? A gente está sempre cometendo os mesmos erros?
Oh, gosh. And, no. I would say that we are emotional human beings, right? And in the old days, when it was just populism, we would like someone who tells us lies, and sometimes we elect them, but most of the time, civil society, democratic forces can move and actually move at the pace of human change. So, for example, in Southeast Asia, right, I covered the fall of Suharto in Indonesia after almost 32 years in power, and the fall of Marcos in the Philippines in 1986, and I watched this nostalgia for authoritarian rule come over and over. But every time it seeps into the public sphere, democratic forces, civil society would come in and at the pace of human comprehension be able to push it back, right? Democracy is hard. It is the hardest form of governance. And yet, it gives you the broadest voices, right? So, but then what happened? And again, I go back, I sound like I'm harping on tech. I love tech. I don't hate it, but the way it is today is manipulative of us, right? So when tech came in and they allowed our emotions to be manipulated exponentially, right? 1,000,000 times. The lie that was fed about me is I'm a journalist who's a criminal. I'm not a criminal. And yet some Filipinos believe that, right? Women, we just came out with a report in Brazil. Women journalists, women activists, women politicians are pounded with the hope that you will voluntarily give up your rights because it's too much trouble. Mm-hmm. And so many Brazilian women have not, right? But it takes so much to keep pushing it forward. So look, I think that if we can go back and give us a shared reality, and I think this is possible. We're certainly working at this at the UN. I am the vice chair of the leadership panel for the Internet Governance Forum, right? Then we have a fighting chance. But don't give up, because this is the year democracy can die. More than 60 elections and about half the world's population will be voting at a time when we have less protection, when these big tech companies have actually taken away trust and safety teams because they can. So we need to hold the line.
Mas isso que você fala de como o sistema informacional está construído, pelo menos em tese, ele é agnóstico. Ele não é direita e esquerda, ele não é conservador, ele não é progressista. Você acha que a extrema-direita consegue navegar melhor nessas águas e por quê?
Let me respond. Yes, they can, because let me say what it rewards, right? It's almost like you're a mom and then you have children and you've told your children, lie. I'm going to reward you. Keep lying. I'm going to keep rewarding you. Some of your kids lie all the time and they win all the time. But then you have other kids who refuse to lie. Will you be a good person if you lie, right? It has become harder and harder to convince our people of definitions and right and wrong, right? So I go back to how do we stop the impunity of manipulation so that governance can be believed? What I want you to come out of this with is to realize that this moment is historical. This moment matters. This moment for Brazil is not just for Brazil, but global in scope. Brazil plays so many roles, and I look forward to, actually, we have to have hope that it will get better, but I've never been as negative as I am today.
Pois é, você está trazendo bastante a questão de fake news, mas eu fiquei bem surpresa no início do ano de assistir uma palestra em que me mostraram dados que, embora fake news seja um problema preocupante, o problema maior é a falta completa de confiança. São as pessoas que não acreditam em nada. O problema não é as pessoas acreditarem em fake news. É que o nível de confiança em qualquer instituição, em qualquer notícia, está muito baixo e não se constrói um país com isso. Então, como jornalista, como que a gente pode reconstruir essa confiança com o público?
these go hand in hand, right? The destruction of trust is a byproduct of the design of these social media companies. And now when you have generative AI coming in, so the two instances that we have AI manipulating humanity, right? This is part of what has led to that. Look, I talk a lot. We've discovered disinformation networks in the Philippines. And I went back, which nation actually did the best in terms of information warfare? Russia. And there was a former KGB chair who became the head of the Soviet Union, Yuri Andropov. He said that disinformatia is like cocaine. Mm-hmm. You take it once or twice, you're okay. But if you take it all the time, you become a changed man, is what he said, but a changed person, right? The problem with this is that disinformation is not meant to make you believe one thing. It is meant to destroy your trust in everything. Exactly. Because you believe in nothing.
Exactly.
If you believe in nothing, you will not vote. You will not join civil society for better governance, right? You are going to be easier to rule by a dictator. So this, again, goes hand in hand, and part of the reason I keep asking for legislation that will put guardrails in place and hold these new gatekeepers, the big tech companies, to account. What do we journalists do? Oh, my God. It's almost like there's a dam falling on us, right? And we're there holding it up by just like holding our fingers so this water doesn't come out, but it's about to fall on us. That's what we're living in. I just came from, last week I was at the Overseas Press Club Awards in the United States, and we lit a candle for every journalist who died last year. 44% more journalists who died in 2023, right, from 2022. The sacrifices journalists have to make today. I mean, why would I need to be okay with going to jail for the rest of my life to keep doing my job, right? Why would Brazilian women journalists have to be okay with getting doxxed, getting attacked, right, in psychological ways? We shouldn't be subjected to these things. These should be illegal. But the concerns of the tech companies and the potential dictators to be aligned, right? When they do these information operations, it brings more money to these tech companies. In the meantime, we sit here like looking at new tech like it's wonderful. It isn't. We can do better, and we must. Otherwise, we won't be able to save our democracies. We will not duck. We will not hide. We will hold the line, right? So our Constitution in the Philippines draws a line. These are your rights. And what my government tried to do is they took a bulldozer to try to make us step off and voluntarily give up our rights. Don't, right? Because when you give up your rights, you're never going to get them back. And we have given up so much. Brazilians know, right? You're actually, again, right? You have survived, including January 8th, right? And that can be lessons for every country around the world. But the other thing I say over and over are the three things that have been destroyed without facts, right? Imagine if you say a lie 1,000,000 times, it becomes a fact, so you can't tell the difference. So without facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. Without any of these, we have no shared reality. We can't solve any problem. We will not have democracy. And then I said the tipping point will be 2024. This is it. We must give it our all and create the kind of world you want your children to have, the kind of world where people will not be killed, journalists will not be jailed, and we work with empathy, right? I think the last part, which I don't say often enough, and journalists, we're not very good at this. We need to tap the parts of humanity, the good, because that's what social media has killed, right? It almost makes it feel like there's nothing good in humanity, but there's so much good. And so we need to tap our imagination, our creativity, to be able to remind our people that empathy is the beginning of everything. I have seen I hope. Right? I have seen so much good, including, I don't think we would have survived this time period under Duterte without all the people who helped us. Some of them from Brazil, right? This is it. This is the time. And I guess if you are watching, if you are listening, please join the fight to create a better future now.
Você está falando de um futuro melhor? Claro que eu vou pensar em jovens e toda a história do mundo. A gente teve milhares de conflitos de gerações, sempre foi assim. Mas agora, se você entrar em qualquer empresa, você vai ouvir essa história de que essa geração que está entrando agora no mercado de trabalho, eles não são comprometidos com nada, eles não são resilientes, são péssimos. Só que quando a gente vai na Rappler, cheio de jovens. Quem estava lá nas ruas, fazendo uma apuração, arriscando a vida, eram jovens muito jovens. E muito imbuídos de propósito e muito corajosos. Então eu queria te perguntar como é que você vê essa geração e como é que você transcende o gap geracional para formar essa equipe vibrante, motivada, competente.
So let me talk about Rappler and then let's talk about Gen Z, right? Brazil is a more populous nation than the Philippines, which has about 110 million people. Our median age is 23 years old. It's kicked up to 25, but Brazil is also young, but your median age is a little older. It's 33 years old, right? So in Rappler, when the government tried to shut us down, I actually held a meeting. We have about 100, 120 people, and I offered our journalists, at that point in January 2018, I said, I had parents who I knew would be concerned, right? So I offered them. I said, this is a different time, so tell us. We will help you find a job in a different news organization. I used to run the largest news group in the Philippines. We'll help you. And not one journalist took the offer because, and this is what's wonderful when your mission is so clear. We became very mission-driven during the time of Duterte. And when the founders, my co-founders and I were exhausted, it was the energy of the youth in Rappler that helped us. And it was always a combination. I think the secret of Rappler was the old and the new, right? Because you need to know what the past is, but you also need that energy that comes from the youth. Now, having said that, in the Philippines, the youth went out and protested, but we are where we are. Let's talk about the world today where Gen Z is growing up with trust destroyed, right? In a performative culture where they look at their feed and the outrage, attention economy is just trying to keep them scrolling. How do you find meaning in this world, right? Because it doesn't teach them anything new, right? That's why I go back to the big tech companies. Do you know TikTok has different codes for those in China where they put like limits to what their kids, to how long their kids can stay on TikTok, and they put educational videos in. That code is very different from what they export to the rest of the world. So, a friend of mine says, this is like spinach and this is cocaine, right? Part of the problem now is when you are ripping everything apart and you keep rewarding the loudest extremes, how do you come to any kind of agreement, right? So this is a challenge for every leader in every institution. It leads to anarchy and chaos if it isn't fixed. And again, I go back to Brazil. You survived January 8th. And while you may seem, all your problems, but you survived and you're moving forward better, right? How do we do that globally?
Você estava falando antes de empatia. No seu documentário, enquanto você está ensaiando o discurso, você pergunta para a Mary Jane, sua irmã, se acreditar no amor e na esperança é piegas e ingênuo. E eu amo a resposta que ela dá, que é você. Para além de toda a fama, de toda a celebração e reconhecimento que são merecidos, quem que você mantém do seu lado para te lembrar de quem você é? Quem cuida da Maria Ressa?
Oh my gosh. I feel this time is so difficult, and I am traveling so much. Literally, I feel like I'm chasing my shadow, and I actually say I'm not going to sleep until the end of 2024. And I can, right? When I'm on the East Coast, it's nighttime in Manila, and when it's nighttime here, I can work a full day in Manila. Okay, who's taking care of it? I have family and friends, and I have a partner who's incredible, but I think I boil down to what we can do now, right? And I actually only look at 3 ideas, and they are part of every single religion, right? The first one is, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's a simple idea that really stayed with me when I was young, and it guides my actions today. The second one is something called the honor code, right? And when I was in school, the honor code is that you're responsible not just for yourself, but for the entire world that you live in. What is your area of influence? And if you can mobilize that, then even better. And then the third one is really that family and friends. Again, this is in How to Stand Up to a Dictator, but I try very hard to fight against the idea of, let me just take care of my family and friends. Because if we duck, it goes back to the question you asked, if we duck these times, we will lose our freedoms.
Quando eu vi você no meio dos jovens no documentário, eu fiquei muito com a imagem da Maya Angelou, que ela escreveu o livro Carta para as Minhas Filhas. Ela não teve filhas e ela enxerga que cada uma das mulheres, cada uma das jovens que tiveram uma vida um pouco melhor pelas bandeiras que ela levantou, são filhas dela, são descendentes dela. E me pareceu um pouco isso, assim, que o seu legado, a sua entrega, os seus filhos são todos os jovens das Filipinas, né?
It's vice versa. They give us energy and we help chart the path forward. But if you remember in the film, right, it was Jodes Gavilan who said, I'm enjoying the last days of democracy. We survived it. We moved from hell to purgatory. And the energy of the youth will be critical, but it must come with some of the old people's wisdom, right? That comes from experience. Our world is diseased. And as we've gone through coronavirus, it's interesting because before the virus hit, I always used to say that disinformation is like a virus that takes over a system and hits a tipping point. Well, then when coronavirus came in, literally you could see that, right? The same thing is still happening today. So I hope that we remind ourselves again of the goodness. We restore trust. And that requires so much suspension, especially from cynical journalists, right? I always say, I'm a cynic, but I'm also a pragmatist, and I am hopeful. Because why do we do what we do, right? So, yes, we must make it better. We have no choice.
Good. Agora, uma sessão de perguntas bem rápidas para responder uma palavra, o que primeiro vier à sua cabeça. Okay. Qual é o aspecto mais marcante da sua personalidade?
Curious.
Boa. Qual é a sua ideia de felicidade?
It's a warm glow. No work. Because it feels as a journalist that the work never stops, right? And it doesn't, actually. What is my idea of happiness? Safety.
Boa. Quem são seus heróis da vida real?
Oh, my God. In real life, well, in Star Trek, it's Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock combined, right? I like the logic and emotions coming together. In real life, you know what? So I struggle today because this is part of what our youth is going to have to deal with. Everything is getting torn down. So even our heroes are being torn apart. We cannot live in a world without heroes. But, you know, who do I look to? I will say, and this is divisive, Hillary Clinton. Because no matter what came her way, she kept standing up and she kept demanding better. And she's certainly gotten the worst attacks, right? She's ground zero of Russian disinformation. Let me think in Brazil. So many women. I will say Patricia Campos Melo.
Sim.
Why? Because she didn't take it. She was being attacked and she filed a case against both Bolsonaros and won. Thank you, justice system, right? Because we have documents that show, we have the data that shows how she was attacked. So there's so many ordinary heroes, people in everyday life who stand up and keep going.
Muito bem, então para encerrar, eu queria que você desse algumas dicas culturais. Livro.
Oh my God, a book, so many. So talk about the rise of the far right, right? This is a book I was actually reading. It's called Secret Money, The Rise of the Far Right. It's a book by Ann Nelson that showed you the long history of the far right in the United States and then how now it's connected globally. It isn't just the social media networks that are connected. It is also connected by power and money.
Documentário.
Oh, I'm so focused on the right now. Sorry, Brazilian far right. But Bad Faith just came out. It's a documentary on what is happening with Christian nationalism. Let me give you some happy ones. Some happy books. My God, do I have any happy books? Rachel Maddow wrote about American fascism, the failed movement of fascism. I'm reading a book on Germany in the 1930s, how the far right and the far left came together and killed the center. Does that sound familiar?
Yes, unfortunately. País para visitar.
Oh my gosh, Brazil. No, a country you should visit. Come visit the Philippines. Our weather is the same, but we have fantastic beaches. We don't have the Amazon, though. I always joke I'm the Department of Tourism for the Philippines because I think we have incredible beaches. But Norway is also incredible on the other side, right?
Muito, muito obrigada, Maria. Foi prazer te conhecer, uma honra. Fico muito emocionada com o seu trabalho e é uma inspiração para a gente aqui no Brasil.
Oh my God, no, thank you for having me.